Ohio's special elections over, and issue one was unfortunately defeated. So it's on to November and our efforts to defeat the abortion amendment here in the state of Ohio. And here on the program today, we're going to be unpacking the language of the amendment and talk to an expert who will be able to make sense of it all. So stick around. You're listening to The Mark Harrington Show. Well, welcome everybody. Mark Harrington here, your radio activist, and you can find out more about our program by going to markharrington.org. We're also on all the popular podcasting platforms. You can pick up the program 24/7, 365, and also follow me on social media. Well, if you've been tuning into the program lately, you know we are right in the heart of the battle here in Ohio. And that is the proposed constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot on November 7th here in Ohio is really the mother of all battles, because what happens in Ohio often happens all across the country. And so I've been blowing the trumpet, I've been beating the drum, I've been standing on the rooftops and shouting for people to start paying attention to what's going on in Ohio, because the game is on now. Now that this special election has come and gone, we are now focused like a laser on defeating this pro-abortion constitutional amendment here in the state of Ohio, because the other side has already telegraphed that they're going to take this across the country to up to 8 states in 2024. So today we are going to get down to business, friends. And whether you live in Ohio or not, you need to understand what this amendment, what this proposed amendment would do to the abortion issue, to preborn children, to parents, to women all across the state. And for that matter, it'll have implications all across the country. And so we're going to basically go through the amendment itself, and we're going to pick it apart, and we're going to tell you the truth. So in order to do that, I have my good friend and colleague, Liz Kent, with us today. And she is a board member of the Right to Life Coalition of Ohio, which I am part of that coalition. Created Equal is that is. And she's a longtime pro-life activist since her days at Kent State University here in Ohio. And she's one of the presenters for the town halls, to which I've been a part of in the last several months, going all across Ohio, presenting the problems with this amendment and getting people to understand what's going on and activating them. So, Liz, thanks for being on the program. I appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, Mark, it's a delight. I'm totally privileged to be a part of your program, so thanks for having me.
Well, we love being with you when we go about doing these town halls. And friends, they've been very well attended all across the state, and we're ready to go back on the road here real soon. And you're going to get a picture of one of those 3 presentations today. At the town halls, there's 3 presentations. One is the reality of abortion. That's my presentation. The other is on the amendment itself. That's Liz Kent's, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And then the last one is what do we do after Roe v. Wade generally, and Linda Tice actually presents that one. And so one of my calls to action up front is, if you like what you hear today, if you learn something from what you heard today and saw, then invite the Right to Life Coalition of Ohio town halls to your area here in Ohio. So Liz, let's get on to it. Let's talk about this amendment. I basically am going to turn this over to you, allow you to present the information that you've gathered regarding this amendment, and we'll just go through it step by step. So go ahead and tell us about this constitutional amendment, which is now officially on the ballot on November 7th here in the state of Ohio.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so we're gonna talk more about the language of this amendment, because the other side is already out there trying to confuse people to say certain things aren't being mentioned. And so I'd like to equip your audience and anybody else that happens to hear this podcast to know more and to be able to recite things well and understand it. So the purpose of today, we're going to help you understand this anti-parent, anti-woman, anti-life proposed constitutional amendment. And we're going to go right into it here. So what is this amendment? Well, it is a proposed constitutional amendment. We haven't voted on it yet. That's going to happen on the 7th of November, coming up in just 3 short months. And this will radically change our state's abortion laws. And if, also a lot of these laws are peripheral to other circumstances in life, but of course they affect the current abortion laws. So anytime you've got a constitutional, a piece of wording in the Constitution that should be contradictory to a statute and existing law, well, the Constitution always overrides that. Okay, so that's one overarching principle here that we have to keep in mind. You'll also see that the wording in this document, this proposed amendment, is it's very broad, intentionally vague, and it's unconstrained. So let's start with the title of the amendment. It's called The Right to Reproductive Freedom with Protections for Health and Safety. I always tell people, say that 10 times fast, right? While patting your head.
Yeah.
They like to throw in all kinds of words with these things, but you'll see that this is nothing protective. There's very little in terms of, health and safety precautions, because those will be thrown out the door. And you can always stop me too, Mark, if you have something you wanted to say. But so who's pushing this? Well, besides the fellow in the background who's sadly popping up everywhere, all over the country, in Ohio, we've got two pro-death coalitions. One calls themselves Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom, and the other calls itself Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights. Everybody likes freedom and everybody likes rights, correct? So
Right.
This is a very enticing kind of couple of coalitions, right? Until you see who they are. So Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom are comprised of many groups, but I'm just, outlining some of the big names that are not specifically local to Ohio. The American Civil Liberties Union, which is the ACLU, they have a chapter in Ohio, and it's my understanding that they take the credit for writing this amendment. They also wrote the Proposition 3 amendment, which sadly passed last year in Michigan. And
Which language is almost exactly like there are a few things left out in this one, but it's almost like the Michigan language.
it is very, very close. One of the big words they left out of their listing is sterilization, because they realized the public doesn't quite like that word yet.
Right.
I'm sure they had focus groups that commented on that. But ACLU has lots of money, as does Planned Parenthood, and they do have a chapter in Ohio. They're called Advocates of Ohio. And as you know, Mark, Planned Parenthood is there to sterilize a country near you or far away from you, depending on where they end up. So they're really not about perpetuating the human population, right? And they have very deep pockets. And then there's a group called URGE, which is not based at all in Ohio. They have people all over the country. They stand for United for Reproductive and Gender Equity. Their big claim to fame is to spread their propaganda to southeastern U.S. colleges, otherwise known as the Bible Belt. So they're ready to malform minds. And all of these groups have, social media posts that tell you all about how parents should not have this, the say in what their kids want to do with their own reproductive freedom, quote unquote.
Yes.
And as I mentioned before, there are other groups involved, but these are the big ones that you need to be aware of. They're not necessarily Ohio based. Okay.
Right. So friends, let me stop you there. People need to understand, when we say that this amendment was crafted and funded by outside sources, outside organizations, we're telling you the truth. Millions of dollars are coming into the state of Ohio to fund this effort, and it's being done by outside special interests and special interest money. So this is true. It's right there for everybody to see. It's public information to see who's behind this thing. And that's why we, as Ohioans or anyone, as far as the state constitution goes, we don't want a piece of our constitution be bought by outside interests. And that's what's going on here, at least they're attempting to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point, Mark, because issue 1, I believe there was almost $15 million that came from out of Ohio to fund the people who were opposing that issue. So getting back to what we're talking about, the second group that's behind this amendment is called Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights. And they're comprised mostly of so-called abortion doctors. I say that in quotations because if they were to take their Hippocratic oaths seriously, they would not be maiming and mutilating children in utero. but that's another topic for another time. So they only comprise about 4% of all Ohio physicians. The amendment itself, and there'll be wording that people can actually get the wording. I'm sure Mark will talk a bit about that in a little bit, but there are 4 sections to this proposed amendment: A, B, C, and D. It's a pretty simply written document, so it's not very long. Going into section A, it says every individual has a right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions, including but not limited to decisions on, and this is where the ACLU pulled out the word sterilization. Okay, but they list 5 things here: contraception, fertility treatment, continuing one's own pregnancy, miscarriage care, and abortion. With this listing, miscarriage care, we have all of these things already. All of this stuff is already accessible in the state of Ohio. One's own pregnancy care, fertility treatment, all this stuff is available already within the state of Ohio. So why this has to get inserted into our founding document, the document that governs our government, is a head scratcher, except that there's more to it than meets the eye. So the other thing is miscarriage care. Sadly, miscarriage is referred to as a spontaneous abortion in medical terminology, and the other side uses that to confuse people. The baby in utero is already dying or dead, and so that's a miscarriage, is because mom has to pass that baby through her system, and that has nothing to do with abortion. Abortion is an elected, intentional killing of an unborn or preborn human baby. Okay, so that needs to be separated out with what miscarriage is. But you'll see, Mark, in the line here, we've got a couple of terms in red. We've got the word individual, and then including but not limited to. So when other people say, well, it doesn't say in here such and such treatment, for instance, quote unquote gender reaffirming care, right, or anything involving puberty blockers or whatever. The idea is that this has to do with reproduction, right? So if any reproductive organ is affected, you could add this to the list because it's not a limited list. It says not limited to in this listing. Okay, so let's go into who has the right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions. Well, every individual. So what does that really mean? Because if they wanted it to be about adult women, they would say women. If they wanted it to be about men, they would say men, but they don't. They know what they're doing here. This is any age. It could be anybody from age 0 on up. At some point, maybe the argument will be made that the newborn baby wants to have an abortion or some awful thing like that, right? And either sex, not just females. Otherwise, it would mention, only females. Okay.
Right. And I think, let me put a fine point on it. I think
Sure.
this is something we really need to drive home. This is intentional, people. They use the word individual so they could be broad enough to allow minors without consent of their parents to have abortions, and we would submit to the voters also gender reassignment surgery. They are intentionally using that term individual in order to make this available to everyone and without parental consent. And so when you see these ads being run by Protect Women Ohio talking about parental rights being stripped away when it comes to this constitutional amendment, this is where we're getting it from. And people say, well, it's not specific. Well, listen, when you leave it up to the courts to determine what this term means, we know where that can go. This type of stuff led to 50 years of Roe versus Wade, friends. So we leave it up to liberal courts to start interpreting what the word individual means. We know it's broad. It's intentionally broad for that very reason.
It's an excellent point, Mark, because there are troops of attorneys waiting in the wings that Planned Parenthood and ACLU utilize to basically dismantle whatever laws could be standing in the way of what they eventually want, which is very unconstrained.
Right, and the ACLU is on record in other states as trying to eliminate parental rights in a lot of different areas as well. So
yeah,
we don't have to be guessing at this. They have telegraphed their intentions in other states across the country about parental rights. They have a disdain for parental rights. They don't believe children should be accountable to their parents. This is something the ACLU, because they're the American civil liberties. They think children should have liberties beyond what is generally acceptable in our country, and basically go against their parents' wishes. And so we're not making this stuff up, friends.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is what they call on social media self-determination, as if a child has the ability to reason and understand and have those experiences that their adult parents would know and be able to protect them from those things. So this is very dangerous, and you're totally right about that. And regarding parental rights, that was something that back in 1982, Planned Parenthood sued the city of Akron, and it went up to the Supreme Court and was decided upon in like the following June of 1983, where they stripped the parents of rights. One of the things in that statute that the city of Akron wanted to pass was to require unmarried 15-year-old minors require that at least one parent gives consent to an abortion. That's not very radical, right? Like, at least have one parent consent to your 15-year-old unmarried daughter's abortion. Guess what? Planned Parenthood didn't like that. They had to take this up to the Supreme Court and completely eliminate that, and they got their way, among other really radical things that came out of that, for the city of Akron. So they've already done it in Ohio. They'll do it again to the nth degree.
Right.
Yep. So this amendment never uses the terminology woman or mother, because, you know, most people who have good experiences with mom, you know, think of warm fuzzies, right? So we don't want that to enter the scene somehow. But it also, right, you know, it makes this weird assumption that a person can change his or her sex, you know, and this is really a strange philosophical thing that starts to enter into our Constitution if this should pass, because one of the weird phenomenons going on right now is we have women parading as men who call themselves trans men, and they are getting pregnant. So now they're saying men can get pregnant. Well, that's defying natural law. They know this, but people who aren't as discerning are going to fall for that. And this kind of strange use of, you know, this ideology will actually be embedded in our state's constitution. It'll be a strange belief system, and also the wording now could open the door to other terminology and words that are, you know, antithetical to natural law.
Right, and I think the point should be made. They aren't going to stop with this. If they get this in the Ohio Constitution, they're going to keep moving with this type of an agenda to enshrine other types of so-called rights into our Constitution. So it doesn't stop with abortion, supposedly. It goes beyond that, even in this amendment. But if they get it passed, they're going to go right back to the Supreme Court again to enshrine so-called other rights that we would find offensive, and most Ohioans would not support. So,
oh, yeah, you're totally
just
right.
never know. We don't want to leave this up to that. I mean,
that's right.
As heinous as those topics are, those should be left to the state legislature through policymakers, not a one-size-fits-all constitutional amendment to which there was no discussion about language, no compromise, no back and forth. It's all or nothing, voted on one day. That's not how these types of things should take place. They should be debated in the legislature through the representatives of the people. And so that's why this constitutional amendment is so dangerous.
And that's why it's so important for people to understand how this language is so broad and can be interpreted in very dangerous ways. Absolutely. So if we move on to Section B, we see that it says the state shall not directly or indirectly burden, penalize, prohibit, interfere with, or discriminate against either an individual or a person or entity that assists the individual in making those reproductive decisions. So again, you know, to whom does this section apply? Well, it talks about, again, this individual, right, from age 0 on up, male or female, seeking the treatment, may not be burdened or interfered with or prohibited. That means mom or dad can't come back and try to sue somebody for taking their child to a clinic of some sort and getting whatever, if it was an abortion or abortion pills or you know, puberty blockers or anything like that. That's very dangerous for parents. So this is out there, hanging in the balance and would be applied to our state's constitution. This is not just a simple legislative, statute, right? So the other entity that this applies to is, of course, the state. And a little bit later, it talks about the definition of the state. But the state can't go back and they can't try to burden or interfere or anything like that with the person or entity that is even assisting the individual. So imagine this, and this could be a scenario that comes out of it. Imagine a sex trafficker, and sadly, we've got that happening in Ohio. Taking somebody to get an abortion or something, and maybe that person gets caught. Well, guess what? You can't burden or interfere with that, because the Constitution now protects that person that assists the individual who is seeking that treatment.
Yeah,
So
let me make one point here as well. This kind of resurrects the Planned Parenthood versus Casey term undue burden, which of course now is history. We've cast down Planned Parenthood versus Casey, but they're trying to resurrect that language. Burden, undue burden, again, can be interpreted very broadly. Anything that they might interpret as interfering with the quote individual's right to abortion or to gender reassignment surgery would be considered an undue burden and therefore unconstitutional. So again, very broad language. We've been there with Planned Parenthood versus Casey. They're trying to bring it right back in to our Ohio Constitution.
It's amazing how they sneak around the system, isn't it?
Yeah.
So getting to your point about a burden, let's think of some laws that are currently on the books in Ohio that would be abolished because they could be interpreted as being burdensome to those trying to carry out these decisions, right? So for one thing, we've talked about parental consent and parental notification laws. Well, those are laws on Ohio books right now. But under this amendment, if somebody could argue the case that this could be a burden to somebody who needs that abortion right now, they need that late-term abortion immediately because, it's a burden for that person to carry this baby to term, okay? Or they need that chemical castration as puberty blockers right now because they're losing their social, circle or whatever. You can't change that. Mom and dad won't be able to go in and help affect the change that they want to see for their children. It would be up to whoever's taking that child or minor, into these procedures. So this is very dangerous. What else counts as a burden? Well, we have a 48-hour waiting period in the state of Ohio. Back I mentioned that 1983 decision the Supreme Court had on the city of Akron. The city of Akron was trying to require a 24-hour waiting period, and that got struck down as unconstitutional according to the Supreme Court back then. So if you don't think that the ACLU and Planned Parenthood are lining up to get their attorneys ready to start hacking away at these statutes that exist in our state code, you got another thing coming, because that's what these people specialize in. Waiting periods are so important because about 60% or 2/3 of women feel some kind of coercion or pressure into getting an abortion. And it's helpful to be able to have, some time to think about your decision and not rush into it. I mean, if you think about it, this is more important than buying a house or getting married. You're possibly bringing new life into the world, right? It's a big decision. So under this amendment, waiting periods would disappear. And another thing to consider, and this is by no means an inclusive list of everything that's already on the books in Ohio that could be gone, but full consent laws, informed consent. Did you know that the city of Akron also lost their informed consent piece to that legislation that was overturned by the Supreme Court back in 1983? They wanted the doctors, the abortion doctors, to give patients, the fetal development information and where they were in their stage of pregnancy and risks and complications that could occur as a choice. If you go and have an abortion, what's at stake for you physically? Well, guess what? The Supreme Court said that wasn't good either, and they abolished that statute, that part of the statute. So if you don't think, again, here we go back. If you don't think Planned Parenthood and the ACLU want to abolish informed consent laws because it could possibly stop somebody from going through with an abortion or a sex change operation or something, you got another thing coming.
Yeah.
So
Before we go on to viability, let me make another point here.
mhm.
You're an Ohioan, I'm an Ohioan. We have fought for decades to put in legislation and this has been legislation passed duly by our legislature, signed by our governor, to put reasonable restrictions on abortion. Those will be wiped out in one single day if this passes on November 7th. And that's what Ohioans need to understand. This type of stuff, which most Ohioans agree with, will be gone. So it's important that we make that clear. That's why I think Governor DeWine did such a good job the other day in his press conference talking about how this is a radical and extreme measure, and it will wipe out all the policy that's been passed in the legislature over the last couple of decades that is accepted and approved by the Ohio voter. So I think it's important for us to make that a point. So go ahead. And we're moving on to, I think, viability might be the next one, because I think this is another key point that we need to focus on, because I think folks are kind of confused about what this might mean and how the courts could interpret it.
Yeah, good point. So it says in this section B, it's sort of toward the end of section B, it says, however, abortion may be prohibited after fetal viability, but in no case may, and I think they put that in there to kind of give it a little pretension, like, oh, we're pretending that we're not so radical, right? But in no case may such an abortion be prohibited if in the professional judgment of the pregnant patient's treating physician, otherwise known as the abortionist or abortion doctor, it is necessary to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. Don't you love it how they don't say mother? Unbelievable. Pregnant patient, whatever, birthing person, right? So let's unpack that just a little bit. Who gets to decide? Okay, the treating physician, the abortion provider gets to decide every single time. So if that abortionist is generally motivated by cash dollars, right? He or she is not going to say, hey, let's put the brakes on this a little bit, okay? The other entity that is included in this section, it says that, the state, it's implied that the state can never forbid an abortion if this abortionist says it's necessary to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's unpack that a little bit. Okay. You mentioned the Casey case. Well, Doe versus Bolton back in 1973 defined what health is. Health is sadly a loosey-goosey term now, that it's anything from emotional to mental to financial to the women's age or familial factors that bear on health. And so if, let's say, a child goes, in for an abortion, somebody who's 14, 15 years old, and the abortionist says, well, maybe you're 26 weeks along. By the way, in the state of Ohio, you cannot have an abortion here past 22 weeks. Now, we voted on a law called the Heartbeat Law, which passed in our legislature a few years back, that after the heartbeat is detected around 6 weeks, okay, there should be no abortion. But unfortunately, okay, our opponents on the other side had to take that to court, and now it's being held up in the Ohio Supreme Court by a Hamilton County judge. So we can expect a lot of this stuff happening if this thing should get codified in our Constitution. So getting back to the life or health, this also has a direct impact on the viability of a baby. And in the state of Ohio, it's generally regarded that 22 weeks is sort of the generally accepted viability time, that if a baby were to be born, he or she could be viable outside the womb without, real extreme measures. And technology is getting so good these days that we're even hearing about babies that are 19 weeks, getting born and getting the help that they need. What is to stop an abortionist from deciding that at 38 and a half weeks or 39 and a half weeks or 30 weeks, the babies are very well developed, okay, and just getting larger, that guess what? I don't think that baby can be viable outside the womb, okay?
Right.
There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing to stop it.
Nothing to stop it. And, I've mentioned on this program in the past, Warren Hearn, who is the entrepreneur, I guess you could, or inventor of late-term abortion in America, was quoted in a national publication recently talking about viability, and he basically redefined it himself. He said that viability is really up to what the mother decides. In other words, if the mother wants the pregnancy, the child, then the baby's viable. But if the mother doesn't want, or the pregnant person, as it said in this amendment, does not want that child, then the baby is not viable. So basically, these words, viability, are being redefined by the abortion industry themselves. And I submit to you that the courts will do the same thing if given the opportunity. This idea of health, you know, you can drive a Mack truck through it. They did that in Doe v. Bolton. And so we're again resurrecting old language from Casey to enshrine in our Constitution here in the state of Ohio language that has now been done away with by the overturning of Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So this is where we make the case strongly that late-term abortions are now going to be enshrined in our Constitution here in the state of Ohio, more than likely tax funded, and we're going to get to that in a second, by Ohio tax dollars. And so it blows out this 22-week limit here in Ohio currently. And people need to understand that we will become, Ohio will become California. We will become New Mexico, New York, all the places where people go to have late-term abortions. That's what's coming to Ohio if we don't defeat this.
So section C goes on with some definitions. It says, the state includes any governmental entity or any political subdivision. So we know that the folks that are behind this, ACLU, Planned Parenthood, they're very adept at using the court system to further their agendas and to break down statutes and things that exist on the books. So we expect that to happen. This is going to be the thing that they do to usher in, like what you're saying, Mark, with late-term abortions, a painful, barbaric procedure that, oh my, I can't imagine how that would look in our state. That's just awful to consider. Section D says that this section is self-executing. That really just means that it's going to take effect if it should pass on November the 7th. You wake up on November the 8th, and maybe we'll be hearing about all these filings that will get done by the ACLU lawyers, against this or that entity, right?
Well, they will certainly be in the wait. That's for sure. I'm sure they are writing those right now.
Right. Yeah. Right. So here's some things when people are having conversations with other Ohioans. The big thing is to remember that this proposed amendment, will erase the basic rights of parents, and it will jeopardize women's health and safety. One of the things I didn't mention about that is in the state of Ohio, an abortion clinic is considered an ambulatory healthcare clinic or center. Right. And the doctors on staff have to have licensing with a nearby hospital in the event of a, perforated uterus or some awful thing happening. If that's considered a burden, because it's another step in the process, it's more paperwork and blah, blah, blah. Guess what? They could easily say, we don't want that. That's out. Okay. So women's health and safety is definitely in jeopardy, especially considering full consent, not having those details about where the risks are in a particular abortion procedure. The big thing that you mentioned too, Mark, is that this allows for painful and I'm going to say barbaric late-term abortion up to the moment of birth with taxpayer funding. Very sadly, recently, the state of Alaska just approved, they were directed, I think, by their state Supreme Court that they now have to have Medicaid funded abortion in the state of Alaska. So, God help them. Do we not think that's going to be coming to Ohio? You think these people are going to be just content without that burden of finance, right, on the patient? They're going to say, no, the state should be paying for your abortion, otherwise known as the taxpayers, right? We mentioned how this empowers abortionists because they can dictate what fetal viability looks at. And also, we touched upon this a little bit. We talked a little bit about sex mutilation or gender reassignment, quote unquote. This is a broad open door for those things, which we know a lot of parents are fighting at different schools around the country. So that's, waiting in the wings, right, as part of this thing. It's just not listed, but it's, not limited to that list of 5 things we talked about. So the
Right.
big takeaway, of course, for Ohioans is, first of all, make sure you're registered to vote for November the 7th. And you want to vote no. We don't even know what the name of this issue is going to be, but we'll
Right.
be
We, by the way, should know. I mean, legally speaking, they have to give it to us by August 25th. So that's within a week or so of
great.
the posting of this broadcast. So we will have an issue number, an amendment number here within a week or so. So,
Great. Yeah. So we'll know what that is, but you'll just know it as this pro-death, anti-family, anti-parent amendment. And then we've got some resources, of course, rtlaohio.org. And Mark, you've got a wonderful volunteer portal on your website for folks that are either in the state of Ohio or outside. Maybe you could describe a little bit about what they can do to help out Ohio.
all right, Liz, thanks so much for unpacking this diabolically evil proposed amendment to the Ohio Constitution. And friends, if you want to find out more, go to rtlaohio.org. If you want to book your own town hall here in the state of Ohio and hear from Liz in person, along with myself and Linda Tice on these town halls, we'll come to your area. But we also ask you to share this video and audio far and wide. Everybody in the state of Ohio, and for that matter, around the country, who cherishes life, preborn life, needs to be equipped and understand what this amendment would mean to the state of Ohio and other states around the country. So, Liz, thanks for being on the program. We appreciate all your help in getting the word out.
Thanks, Mark. God bless you for all the work you're doing too. Thank you.
So, friends, I hope you enjoyed Liz Kent and her explanation of the radical and extreme abortion amendment that is on the ballot here in the state of Ohio on November 7th. Hopefully, you can pass this on to your friends and colleagues. And everyone needs to get equipped. They need to understand what the amendment means, because we're going to hear from here until November, we're going to hear a bunch of lies about this. We're going to say the other side's going to say that women are going to die if we don't pass it, and that we're going to outlaw abortion. Of course, that's not true. And this amendment it has language that exposes them and their lives. So, friends, please pass this information along. Also, we have come out with a new red line document, and that is a markup, if you will, of the abortion amendment. And if you go to createdequal.org/abortion amendment, that's createdequal.org/abortion amendment, you can take a look at this, and you simply just hover your mouse over the red letters, and then it will pop up a little box that'll explain what they mean by this. This is a very effective way to get the truth about what the amendment means. And it's been very popular, and people have been using it all across the state, and for that matter, across the country. So that is createdequal.org/abortion amendment, our new red line document or markup of the proposed November abortion amendment here in the state of Ohio. And then the final call to action is this: come to Ohio. We're telling you, folks, we need everybody on board. Again, this is for all the marbles. If we can win in Ohio, we can establish that Normandy Beach, where we can say no more. We put an end to it here, and we can launch from there new offensive measures in other states. But right now we're playing defense, and we need all hands on deck to come to Ohio, because this is a national referendum on abortion. And so, friends, if you can come to Ohio, please let us know. Go to createdequal.org/Ohio and volunteer. We'll put you in the game. We're doing door-to-door campaigns, phone banking, all kinds of public outreach around the state. So we need your help. You can help us out also by donating to Created Equal by going to createdequal.org, createdequal.org. So we'll see you next time. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, America, to bless God.
You've been listening to Mark Harrington, your radio activist. For more information on how to make a difference for the cause of life, liberty, and justice, go to createdequal.org. To follow Mark, go to markharringtonshow.com. Be sure to tune in next time for your marching orders in the culture war.